The Colorado experiment that was done in the early 1970s is probably one of the most controversial topics in bodybuilding ever recorded. The reason is the results of the experiment were almost insane. Nobody had ever seen that amount of muscle growth in such a short period of time with so little exercises. Keep in mind, they were doing more or less one set to complete failure of full body workouts, maybe 4 times per week, and the workouts didn't last any longer than really 30 or 40 minutes. Now, this is in direct contrast to traditional bodybuilding approaches at the time, which resulted in 1 to 2, 3-hour workouts every single day of the week. The purpose behind this experiment was for Arthur Jones to demonstrate that the body can, in fact, grow muscular size and muscular strength very rapidly if very intense training protocols were in place. There are a lot of rumors behind the Colorado experiment that they fudged the numbers, they were misleading in their recording, and that Casey Viator had taken steroids and was undersized. But the truth is, all of that is actually documented in the experiment. They made no effort to withhold any of this information, and it is clearly documented in all of the literature in the recordings of the Colorado experiment. So the truth is, Casey Viator and himself, Mr. Jones, did see rapid, almost magical improvements in muscular size and strength in just 28 days of training, but there were some pretty special circumstances at the time which allowed Casey Viator to grow so much. For instance, it's clearly stated in the Colorado experiment that Casey Viator had been in the hospital for a couple weeks prior. He suffered an infection and an allergic reaction to a drug, which caused him to lose about 16 or 17 pounds. Casey Viator's normal walking around weight was a little over 200 pounds. When he entered the Colorado experiment, he was about 167 pounds. So it's safe to say that a lot of the weight he gained was regaining a lot of the water retention, muscle glycogen, and previous weight that he had already held. But what makes this even more remarkable is that Casey Viator ended up gaining an additional 12 pounds above his normal body weight in such a short period of time, while adding all that additional weight he lost and reducing body fat substantially, and doing so with extremely brief workouts. Not only did Casey Viator himself see ridiculous results, but Arthur Jones, who was conducting the experiment at the time, also underwent all of the exercises and too gained a substantial amount of muscle while reducing body fat. And he was in his 50s at the time and completely drug-free. Arthur Jones was not a big believer in growth drugs. In fact, he was under the impression they didn't even work. He thought it was a myth. And he assumed, because Casey Viator told him, that Casey Viator was not taking anabolic steroids at the time. But we now know this is not true. Casey Viator was taking anabolic steroids at the time, but that doesn't really take away from the fact he still gained that much muscle that quickly, and it also doesn't take away from the fact that Arthur Jones gained a lot of muscle very, very quickly. So let's start with Arthur Jones' results, because he wasn't taking anabolic steroids, he was in his 50s at the time, he wasn't a bodybuilder, and a pretty average physique. Arthur Jones entered the experiment at a body weight of 144 pounds. By the end of the experiment, he was at a body weight of 162 pounds with 1.82 pounds of fat loss at the same time, without a calorie deficit and eating what they refer to as just a normal balanced diet. Keep in mind, Arthur Jones also did not engage in any leg training during the workouts. He focused mostly on the upper body, arms, shoulders, and back with a handful of movements, and added 1 5/8 inches to his arms, which makes the results even more outstanding, because if he had done the leg training at the time, considering your legs hold a lot more muscle tissue than your upper body, he would have added even more muscle mass. So that increase in 20 pounds of mass was only in his upper body. Casey Viator, obviously about 20 pounds underweight at the time, started at 167 pounds. After 28 days, he measured a body weight of 212 pounds with significant fat loss as well, just eating a normal balanced diet without any sort of calorie surplus or calorie deficit. But we need to keep in mind, Casey Viator was a genetic freak. He was a professional bodybuilder. He won the Mr. Universe at the youngest age ever of 19 years old, and of course, he was using anabolic steroids. So I think what the problem is a lot of people think that they too can add this much body weight following this workout, but you need to remember, people are not going to be under the same circumstances. Severely undersized, professional bodybuilding genetics, and anabolic steroids. So it's safe to just kind of ignore Casey Viator's results and focus on Arthur Jones's results and the other collegiate football players that also engaged in the experiment. Casey Viator's ridiculous results is really what drew this much attention to the Colorado experiment. So I'm going to read through part of the document, part 4, results of the experiment, that was written by Dr. Elliot Pleas, who was recording all the measurements at the time. And this is what he says. On May 1st, 1973, a strength test was conducted in the weight room at Colorado State University. 2 subjects were tested, Arthur Jones and Casey Viator. At the suggestion of Mr. Jones, a universal machine was used for the test because, he said, if we use our own equipment for the strength test, a question may then be raised on the subject of basic strength increases. A secondary reason for using a universal machine was that the fact that similar exercises performed with a barbell require more skill. And since we were primarily interested in the measuring basic strength, it was desirable to reduce the factor of skill as much as possible. Exactly 28 days later, on May 29, 1973, a strength test was conducted with one of the subjects, Casey Viator, and the other subject. Arthur Jones was not tested at the end of the experiment because he became sick on the night of May 26 with an intestinal flu, and he was admitted to the hospital. The sickness prevented him from completing the experiment as planned. However, all the workouts that were performed by Arthur Jones were observed and timed by myself, Dr. Elliot Pleas, and a number of other witnesses, and his rapid increases in strength was obvious from workout to workout. Having started at a body weight of 144.1 on May 1st, Mr. Jones was weighted immediately before his workout on May 26th. In a period of 25 days, his body weight increased to 162.375 pounds, a net gain in body weight of 18.275 pounds. But his body fat level had been reduced in the meantime. A body fat measurement in the whole body counter on May 23rd indicated a loss in body fat of 1.825 pounds. So it's reasonable to assume that his actual gain in lean body mass was approximately 20.1 pounds. Now remember, this is Arthur Jones, a guy in his 50s, not a competitive bodybuilder, and he was able to gain that much muscle mass in that short a time only training his upper body. But even if we take the figures recorded on May 23rd, the results are very impressive. During the first 22 days of the experiment, Mr. Jones gained 13.62 pounds of body weight while reducing his body fat level by 1.82 pounds, a net gain in lean body mass of 15.44 pounds. And that was just in the first 22 days of the experiment. Now into Casey Viator's results. During the first 2 weeks of the experiment, Casey Viator gained 28.93 pounds, an average of 2.06 pounds per day. During the final 2 weeks, he gained 16.35 pounds, an average of 1.16 pounds per day. So his rate of gaining declined by approximately 43% during the final 2 weeks, which was only to be expected. But even during the final 6 days of the experiment, he was still gaining in excess of a pound per day. Neither subject produced sudden spurts of growth that might have indicated dehydration prior to the start of the experiment. On the contrary, the actual gains and the rate of gains displayed by both subjects remained remarkably steady throughout the entire experiment. But remarkable as they were, the body weight gains do not indicate the actual results, because both subjects reduced their starting level of body fat during the experiment, indicating that they were rapidly adding body weight while reducing body fat at the same time, a result that I previously considered impossible. While increasing his body weight by 45.28 pounds, Viator reduced his starting level of body fat by 17.93 pounds, indicating an actual increase in lean body mass of 63.21 pounds. The results produced by Mr. Jones have been listed above, and when due consideration is given to the great difference in age between these two subjects, and of course the use of steroids by Casey, I think the final results are equally remarkable. So was the Colorado experiment designed to be misleading? Was it fraud? Was it a scam? Was it a hoax? Well, based on this document, it appears that it was not. Although the results can be misleading because Casey Viator was so undersized, he was a professional bodybuilder, a genetic freak, and using anabolic steroids, I think a lot of the problem is that people assume that they could see the same results if they applied the same method just because Casey saw such significant results. And this is what throws people off. We need to keep in mind most people have average genetics. They're not bodybuilders. Most people are not using anabolic steroids. So it would be really foolish to assume that if you applied this same workout protocol to your training that you too could see 63 pounds of muscle growth in 4 weeks, because most people are not using anabolic steroids. They have average genetics. They're not professional bodybuilders. So I think what throws people off is that Casey Viator is certainly a statistical outlier, and that's why his results were so profound. So I think it's more important to focus on Arthur Jones and the fact that he was in his 50s at the time, a much older individual, not a bodybuilder, not good genetics, no growth drugs, but he gained 20 pounds of lean body mass in a short period of time. So I think it's safe to say that that type of result can be accomplished by many people who attempt a similar type of really high intensity workout, but you'd be foolish to think that you could gain 40, 50 pounds of muscle in such a short period of time because, of course, you're not Casey Viator and you're not using the drugs he was using. So personally, I don't think the Colorado experiment was a hoax. I think it was just misinterpreted by a lot of people. Because when you see somebody gain 63 pounds of muscle in a month, obviously your eyebrows are going to be raised because it seems nearly impossible. And for most people, that is absolutely most people, that is impossible. But for an undersized bodybuilder, definitely possible. But if Arthur Jones could see such a rapid improvement in muscular size in just his upper body without training his legs, and simultaneously reducing his body fat without a calorie deficit, I think it's safe to assume that many average individuals could see relatively similar results to him if employing a very intense training protocol like he was. But the whole purpose of this experiment was merely to prove that you do not need to be spending 6-7 days a week in the gym for 2 to 6 hours like Arnold Schwarzenegger was significant muscle growth. The truth is you can see a significant amount in a short period of time by employing really intense brief training. But also keep in mind, these were supervised workouts. The supervision makes a huge difference. If you were to go attempt the Colorado experiment on your own, you're not going to have Arthur Jones or a trained instructor pushing you to your maximum limits, which I think is very important and a lot of the reason why the results were so good. Most people think they're training hard, but they're not training nearly as hard as the subjects in this experiment were and as hard as Arthur Jones could get them to push. So I'm sure the question a lot of people have is, if I do the Colorado experiment, will I gain 20 pounds of muscle? Well, I think you will gain a significant amount of muscle, but the results aren't going to be as good as the Colorado experiment because you don't have the supervision, or the instruction of somebody who really knows how to push you to your max limits. But of course, that's what I teach in my coaching program. I teach you how to reach that maximum amount of intensity in your own workouts in my coaching so that way you can see similar results to this. Believe it or not, I have people in my coaching gaining 5 to 10 pounds of muscle in 4 weeks all the time, training on their own, unsupervised, after my instruction. So to wrap it up, despite what the rumors say, the Colorado experiment was not a hoax. There were some special circumstances in place that make it unrealistic for almost everybody to see those kinds of results. But if we look at Arthur Jones, an older man in his 50s, not on growth drugs, average genetics, I think it's safe to assume that many people could see significant muscle growth with extremely intense brief workouts in a very short period of time. And I see it all the time in my coaching. Many of my clients get DEXA scans, and after a month, they see at very least 5 pounds of muscle growth with a simultaneous reduction in body fat. Here's one, I'll pop it up on the screen for you to see. So I think the validity is undeniable to intense, brief, high-intensity training workouts. And even if the results were similar to traditional, high-volume, high-frequency bodybuilding workouts, it would make sense to do an approach more like this just for the time-saving aspect alone. If you could gain 10 pounds a month training 5 or 6 days a week with 1 to 1.5 hour workouts per week, or the same 5 to 10 pounds in a month with just 2 30, 40-minute workouts per week, wouldn't it make sense to choose the latter approach than the former? And this is mostly why I'm a proponent of high-intensity training. It saves you a heck of a lot of time. And a lot of the times for the average individual, the results are better because people are focused on pushing their body as hard as they can rather than staying in the gym as long as they can. And we know that intensity of effort is the main driver of motor unit recruitment and stimulating those motor units to grow. If you want to try a more refined program comparable to the Colorado experiment, go to goldenerrosystem.com, try my high intensity program where I apply these same principles, just in a more refined, updated version, and people see crazy results all the time with just a couple of workouts per week. So that's my thoughts on the Colorado experiment. It's not a hoax, it's not a scam, it's just misinterpreted by the vast majority of people. And the truth is, you can see substantial changes in muscular strength, size, and apparently fat loss with just a couple of really intense workouts per week.